Our first speaker this morning is Chris Urmson, the director of the self-driving cars projects at Google. Chris was a member of the Carnegie Mellon team that won the 2007 DARPA Grand Urban Challenge. Something big happened to Chris earlier this year. He received a letter from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration letting him know that as far as the agency was concerned, Google was now a driver. Google's autonomous car now was, as far as they were concerned, a driver, and that they would be held at fault if there was an accident. So, on that note, Chris, join us on stage and tell us how the project is going. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I guess I'm Chris Urmson. I lead the technical work at Google on self-driving cars, and I guess I'm now the proud parent of a driver, along with my two boys. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the history. I'll dive into a little bit about the Urban Challenge and Grand Challenge for a couple minutes, a little bit about the technology, and a little bit about what to expect. But before I jump into that, if it's possible to get my slides to advance. There we go. Thank you. Sorry about that, guys. I get a chance to come and talk to people like this, but it takes an army to actually move this technology forward, and I wouldn't be able to talk to you about it without these incredible people that do the work back home on the project. So what I'm showing you today is really their work more than mine. So for me, though, this story started in a desert, in the Atacama Desert in Chile. I was down there on a NASA project with the team from Carnegie Mellon exploring the desert with a robot that went about this fast. And in fact, it was so slow that kind of the buzzards would fly off the hills nearby, circle overhead, assuming whatever was moving that slowly was going to die. They got really disappointed by about day 3. And my advisor flew down to check out how the project was going and said, "Hey, Chris, I heard about this DARPA challenge. We're going to have robots that are going to drive from Los Angeles to Las Vegas across the desert, hitting 50 miles an hour." And having spent a couple of weeks chasing a robot moving like this, that sounded awesome. So I said, I'm in. And we pulled together a bunch of graduate students, and in about 6 months, we took a Humvee apart and kind of made it into a robot and did this to it. Notably, the black things are supposed to be down. We were testing the first time we tried to get it to 150 miles, came around a corner, tripped over itself, did that to it. We got it put back together, we put it into the Grand Challenge. It was the robot that went that 7.5 miles of the 150 miles and then got high centered on a berm. It seemed like a disaster to us at the time, but when we looked at kind of the product of speed and distance, it was about an order of magnitude more than anyone had done before. And so we were excited about that, and despite the press kind of crucifying everyone involved, DARPA said, come back in a year and a half and let's see what happens then. And so we did. And we brought a second vehicle, and again, about 10 days before the competition, we parked it on its roof. We got it back together. This is the wonder of having graduate students. Entered in the competition, and as Jason said, 5 of those vehicles, including our 2, finished the competition that day. Unfortunately for us, the guys from Stanford also entered, and they won the competition, and their vehicle's now in the Smithsonian. This was really because it was such a monumental day for the whole field. We got a thank you. They got the $1 million check in the Smithsonian. But the Defense Department said, okay, that's great. You can drive across the desert without hitting too many things. Now let's get them to be kind of driving on their side of the road, and let's get them to park and be able to move around bases. And so they came up with the Urban Challenge in 2007. And the idea here was drive 60 miles around this base, don't bump into anything, obey traffic laws, at least at stop signs, and kind of stay out of the way of the other traffic. And in this video, you're seeing from the vehicle that I was working on, you can see the cars with stuff on the roof, those are the other robots, and the cars that are breaking the rules are the traffic drivers that they hired to follow vehicles around and generate traffic that day. And if you squinted just right, you would think, wow, we've solved the problem, right? This car, 60 miles later, had driven around, came back, and actually finished that challenge. And that year, we actually had 6 teams finish it. And we kind of got up on our soapboxes and said, self-driving cars are coming. They're going to be here. We can go make something happen in the world. And we were really excited about it. And the Defense Department said, you're right, they're here. Problem solved. Go figure it out yourselves. We're not funding it anymore because somebody else should pick up the tab now. And so it ended up getting a little quiet in the space for a couple of years. And then in 2009, we started a program at Google to move this technology kind of from the laboratory out into the world and try and do something good with it. And so this is my team's mission. It's to improve people's lives by transforming mobility. And it sounds a little corporate, but this is what it means. First, there's a huge segment of the population that doesn't get the privilege of driving. So this is Steve Mann. He's blind, it turns out. Incredibly capable guy, but instead of a half-hour commute every day, he has a 2-hour commute because he has to piece together bits of public transit. And so for someone like Steve, there is no other really good option to get around in life. He doesn't have the same privileges we all have. Safety is another huge impact. So in the US, 35,000 people were killed on the roads last year. 1.2 million people were killed worldwide. Those are big numbers, and so it's hard to really understand them. 35,000 people is more than a 737 crashing every workday, 5 times a week. We wouldn't accept that in public transit. Why, or in air transit, why would we accept that on our roads? We can definitely do better, particularly since the large cause of those crashes is human error. Congestion is a disaster. We have more car miles traveled and not as much road, and it has a huge toll on people. So it turns out if you look at how many lives we basically waste in traffic every day, it's 162 people. Just their time is kind of spent just getting to and from work every day. So when I say transforming mobility, this is what we're talking about, this whole raft of activities. So we've been at it at Google for the last 7 years, and the program's really had 3 phases. The first phase was trying to prove to ourselves that the technology could actually be commercialized. We came to the company not with the idea of kind of publishing research papers, but with moving it forward to a product. And we weren't we weren't convinced that it could actually happen. Then we started spending some time moving into making vehicles that could drive on freeways. And then over the last few years, we've been really trying to make cars that could drive everywhere. To prove to ourselves the technology could really work, we set 2 goals. One was to drive 100,000 miles on public roads, and that was 10 times more than anyone had ever done before. And the other was to pick a bunch of really interesting places to drive. One kind of gave us statistical data, and the other allowed us to understand the whole breadth of the problem. Within about 2 years, we were able to pull these challenges off, and we were able to convince ourselves that yes, this technology actually could work. It's not ready yet, but there's a path to actually seeing it in the world. And so we turned to what we thought would be our first product. And that was a vehicle that you could get into, put it on the freeway, press a button, and it would drive down the lane for you. And then when you got near your exit, it would tell you you have to take over and drive. And this was, for us, really condensing the scope and making it as simple as possible. And we thought that would be a wonderful product. And so we worked on that for 2 years, and we got to the point where we were pretty sure it was ready to go, and we sent out an email to Google, and we said, hey, anyone want to come try a self-driving car? We'll let you borrow it for a while, you just need to tell us about the experience. And so within about 24 hours, we had 4,000 responses. It is Google. And of that, we picked 140 people that got to use the cars in their daily lives. And we looked at what they were doing in the vehicle, and we had them come in and tell us how they felt about it and how they used it. And so we had people like this one guy drives a Porsche. He comes in the first day and says, this whole thing is stupid, right? I like driving, I own a Porsche. I'm only doing this because I like gadgets. And then he had it for a week, and he came back and he said, you can't have it back. Turns out I'm a terrible driver. All those other people are terrible drivers. This thing is magical, right? And so we thought we were onto something because we got universally that this was a wonderful feature. And then we looked at what they were doing in the car. And we told them, look, you work for Google, we know who you are. You're representing the product. We're going to be keeping an eye on you. And by the way, this is a prototype, right? We've tested it pretty well, but it's going to break. And you need to be there when it isn't. You need to pay attention the whole time. And we showed them it breaking, and then we let them try it. And what we found was that these people very, very quickly believed in the technology and accepted that it was going to work, because it really did almost all the time. To the point that we had one guy in the car who thought it'd be really funny for other drivers on the freeway to think there was no driver. So, he sat there in the seat and he, lowers it all the way back on the freeway, right? And we had another guy in there who notices the cell phone battery is low, so he, checks, pulls out his laptop from the back, pulls out the charging cable, plugs the two in, and then looks out the window at 65 miles an hour on the freeway. And we said, this is not good. And we have a choice now. There's 3 paths, right? So one is, launch it and see. The next is let's electroshock them or shake the seat or something to make sure that they're paying attention. And the third was let the customer do what they want to do, right? Which is not pay attention to driving. And we picked the last avenue. And we realized it was going to be really hard. So this is an intersection I bike through on my way to work every day. If you contrast it to the slide before on the freeway, first, traffic's going every which direction. There's traffic lights, there's railway crossings, there's pedestrian crossings, there's cyclists, there's pedestrians, and then you have road engineers who do this to the road. It turns out cars don't drive like that. They need curves. And yet you still have to drive in those situations. And so that's what we've been doing for the last few years. And in pushing this idea of a vehicle that drives you rather than having to drive a vehicle, we wanted to understand what should that vehicle look like. And so we designed a vehicle from the ground up to be safe for self-driving and to kind of be a vehicle that drives you. And if it drives you, there's things you don't need, like steering wheels and brake pedals and gas pedals. Because if the steering wheel is there, there's kind of an implicit contract you're going to do something with it. So let's get that confusion out of the way. And of course, the vehicle needs an incredible amount of sensing to understand the world around it and see what's going on. So we combine laser, radar, and camera data to do that. And this is what it looks like. So we have short-range lasers that allow the car to see in close. We have mid-range lasers that allow the car to understand the situation around it. And then it can peer with very high resolution where it needs to, out to a couple of 100 meters, and look down the road and give it all the situational awareness it needs. And so this is how the software kind of works, is it starts with the car understanding roughly where it is. We layer in this map, and then the laser data that allows it to kind of see the shape of things around it. Now from the laser data, we need to extract what's going on in the scene and classify it. So here we start by understanding that's a cyclist, there's some cars and cones and a pedestrian in front of us. But that's not really enough, because it turns out, if you look at this scene, that's actually a police officer with his door open, pulling the car over. And so the car actually adds semantic understanding of the door being open, that is a stopped vehicle, and the vehicle in front of it are a stopped police car, and that's